Right, let's go back to one of our top stories now. Of course, the ongoing Transnet strike has huge implications for the country's road freight industry. Trucking companies are unable to access ports to pick up containers at Transnet terminals. Unions have rejected the latest wage hike offer of 4.5%. The strike has now entered its 8th day. Negotiations to end the strike continue today. For more on this, let's speak to the Road Freight Association's Gavin Kelly, who joins us now virtually. Gavin, thank you very much for your time here on All Angles, and good morning. Firstly, the first thing I always think about is that sometimes truck drivers are transporting perishable goods, and this will obviously have a detrimental effect all the way down to, the lowest paid worker.
Good morning, Rafiwa, and good morning to your viewers. Yeah, perishable goods is one of the greatest concerns, or what we would call time-sensitive freight, because it's not always only perishable goods. Sometimes it is non-perishable goods, but that need to catch a sailing of a ship. And as you know, ships don't just start and end in South Africa. They're on part of an international or a global voyage. So sometimes it's even something like ore or something we've produced which isn't going to really die because it's not in a container or a freezer. So that's of concern. But the other concern really has two parts to it. It's our drivers who are sitting in trucks. Yeah. Some trucks have been standing outside those ports for 4 days. And what do you do as a driver? Where do you go and get food? How do you keep your truck safe? How do you do your normal hygienic type operations and look after yourself? And then, of course, secondly, there are a lot of transporters, especially the smaller transporters, whose trucks are now caught up in these queues, in these delays, and can't service the other bits of contract or the other customers that they had, for example, on a return trip, to now move their goods, which might have had nothing to do with the port at all. It could have just been, from Durban, for example. If you'd gone down to the port from Durban to Richmond or Durban to Empangeni, it wasn't necessarily an export or an import leg. So there are three parts to this.
And I mean, Mr. Kelly, what's happening now is that there's been a new offer on the table by Transnet, but a union as big as SATAU, which actually represents many of, the employees of Transnet, has rejected this offer. So this means negotiations are once again deadlocked and they must continue. What's your reaction to the fact that, you're already mentioning 4 days, trucks stuck at different ports for 4 days? It's going to be extended, clearly.
Well, we already know that this has been going on for about 7 to 8 days, Rafiwa. So 4 days for some they would consider lucky. I know there are a couple who have been stuck a little bit longer. The longer that these trucks stand, the greater the danger that a lot of our operating companies, and not all of our operating companies, are huge companies that have the financial resources to carry them through something like this. So the greater the danger that we're going to see a lot more companies close, call it a day. I've spoken to a number of companies today who've said that they've just faced so many things over the last 2 years. COVID being one of them, those riots in July, there were those terrible floods that happened. There have been on and off things that have happened in terms of protest, fuel increases, tire increases, and some of them are saying this is probably, for them at least, going to be that proverbial straw that breaks the...
Well, it looks like, once again, like you're mentioning, maybe I am being negative, but it looks like more businesses will lose out because of this particular strike. And that means more livelihoods will also then be affected, because it doesn't look like there's any agreement, especially when you look at some of the employers telling their union representatives that they believe that the executive of Transnet paid itself about an 8% salary hike last year, and now whatever they're asking for, they cannot be given. So it's a catch-22, isn't it, Mr. Kelly? Because at the same time, you have to understand the plight of those workers.
Definitely. This is not an easy situation. And obviously, you've got to be very careful in how you portray the way in which you're going to deal with your workers. And I don't pretend to be a labor expert. But yes, obviously grounds for unhappiness. And when you plead poverty on the one hand, but certain categories of your employees get very, very large increases, that's always going to be a ground for unhappiness. And secondly, The question still remains as to at what are we going to settle, because we need to settle as a country.
Yeah.
We need to settle. We need to get those ports operating. We need to ensure we don't lose not a single job. We've got to look after our citizens. So the question is going to be, at the end of the day, how are we going to fund this? Because I'm sure there's going to be some sort of an agreement at a far higher rate than what employers here really wanted to settle at. And how are we going to make sure that that doesn't make our logistics chains totally unaffordable in the global context?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And that's what I think a lot of people worry about. According to any of your members, for instance, Mr. Kelly, have any of them told you that they are already shutting down their businesses? I know that they've come to you, like you said earlier, about issues that they had to face because of the lockdown and then the July unrest. Are any of them telling you that they're thinking of shutting down now?
Oh, yes, we've had a couple, especially in what we call micro or small operators, who said that's it. They just cannot afford this anymore. They've used all of the financial resources available to them. Some of them are choosing business rescue. But what is actually of concern is that a fair amount of them are thinking about moving to different ports. So going to ports in South Africa. And once that happens and the shipping lines move to those ports, it becomes almost an unstoppable trickle of a logistics chain moving away from a place that just cannot operate. And that's really what we've got to watch, because in that scenario, we lose jobs far quicker than just in terms of firings.